Hello and welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to create a Azure function which will get triggered by any file upload in a blob storage. Now, in real life scenarios, the blob upload to a blob storage can happen directly via Azure Storage Explorer by a user, or it could be application or any other source that can upload a file through APIs to storage blob. Once the function is triggered, our function will get this blob storage file as input parameter from input binding, and then we are going to save the input message to a Cosmos DB collection. So let's go ahead and create this function. So I'm back inside my function app. We already have two functions created previously. Now to create the new function for storage blob trigger, let's find out the name of the template that we need to use. So I'm going to run the same command, and under JavaScript we have Azure Blob Storage Trigger. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to search in my bash shell history by pressing Ctrl R for our command that we used earlier to create the function. Now instead of storage queue, I'm going to name it as storage blob trigger function, and I'm going to copy the new template name here, Azure Blob Storage Trigger. Let's press enter, and again we have a new folder with its own function.json file. Now inside our Visual Studio Code we have a new folder called storage blob trigger function. Now inside our function.json file, now we have an input binding with direction in. The type of binding is blob trigger, and I'm going to keep the default name for the input binding. Again, we will have to give the Azure Web Job Storage variable name here, so I'm going to copy it in here, and also we need to update the path. Now this path is nothing but the complete path to the blob storage. So I go back to my storage explorer. Now inside a blob container, earlier we created one blob container called test. I'm going to just rename if possible. So rename is not possible, I'm going to delete it and create a new container. I'm going to call it tgg blob. Now inside, so think of the blob storage as a folder. Now I can create a new folder, let's say input, inside my blob. Now if I want my function to trigger whenever I upload something inside the input folder, I need to give the complete path in function.json file. So here I will have to add tgg blob and then the input folder name, and whatever file I'm going to upload here, it will be picked up and sent as input to my function. Now inside my index.js, again I'm getting the blob here. Now the blob will be in the form of buffer, so we can get the length of the blob in bytes, and we are also printing out the binding data for blob trigger. Let's go ahead and test it in local environment. So I'm going to my bash shell, clear my screen, and start my function. So a blob trigger function has also started. Now to test our function, we need to create a sample file to upload into our input folder. So I'm going to create a new sample file here. Don't get confused, I'm just creating it in my Visual Studio. It has nothing to do with the rest of the code. I'm going to create a JSON file with the same theme, equal to anchor, save it. Now I'm going to just upload this file in my blob trigger sample.json. So we are uploading it in input directory. Let's upload it. That's it. So our file got uploaded here. Let's go back to our function and see if it got triggered. So here you can see that our blob storage trigger function got triggered, and we got the output as well. So we are able to print out the whole path of the file that we uploaded and the size of the file. Now let's go ahead and add an output binding to store this JSON data that we get into a Cosmos collection. Now to do that, we are just simply going to get the output binding copied over from our storage queue function and paste it in our storage blob trigger function as output binding. We're using the same connection string, same collection as our output binding. Now again, in our index.js, I'm going to bind the output using the same binding name, and I'm going to set it to my blob. So let's go ahead and test it once again. But this time I'm going to change the name to, let's say, Raj, so that we are able to differ between the two items that get saved in the collection. Let's start our function once again. So our function is started. Let's go to our storage count, and inside our input folder I'm going to upload the sample.json file and upload. So the file is uploaded. Let's go and see if our function got triggered. So you can see that our function got triggered, but our execution has failed. Let's see what the error is. Exception while executing function. Value cannot be null. Right, so we are trying to save a null value as document value in our Cosmos DB. And by default, if the maximum queue count or maximum retry of 5 has reached, your message will be moved to a poison queue. In this case, it's a web jobs blob trigger poison queue. And you can see this queue if I refresh my storage count here. A new poison queue has been created. And a record of failure has been added here. Right, so you can see that a blob trigger failed with the reference of the blob name. Right, so if you want to retry or keep track of this queue, you can pick the failed messages from here and retry your triggers. So let's go back to our code and try to fix this error. Now to fix that issue, we need to convert the buffer into string and then parse the string into a JSON file. That's it. So our buffer will get converted into a string data, and then string will be passed into a JSON data, and we should be able to store the JSON into our collection. So let's go back to our command prompt and start our function once again. So function has started. I'll go back to my storage and I'm going to upload the same file once again. You can upload the same file again and again. The storage will ask you to replace the file. Just apply to all the conflicts. Okay, and this should trigger our function once again. And this time our function got completed successfully. So we should have something in our Cosmos DB collection. So inside my collection, I'm going to refresh my TGG collection and we have our data saved in our collection. So here we were able to create another Azure function with blob storage as trigger, and we were able to store the JSON file that we uploaded in our blob into Cosmos DB collection. That's all for this lecture, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.